Hi guys, so recently I found what we'll call an article. I found an article that was titled, "Why Life is Too Short to Read Fantasy Novels." It sounded super enlightening, so I decided I'd give it a read, but very quickly I realized this article would be way better to read with all of you. The article is a little long, so I'll go ahead and every now and then bounce between stuff, but I'll try to put stuff up on the screen so you guys can read it also. And there is a little bit of foul language that I know none of you care about, but whenever we get to one of those words, I'll just substitute it out. So right away at the beginning, they let us know what's prompted this entire article, which is that somebody asked them why they weren't watching Game of Thrones, and their response was, "Not only do I not give an F about any of that fantasy nonsense, I'm not sure anyone should." Now, this statement takes a lot of qualifying, and I'm going to try and get my caveats and definitions out in one paragraph. They start off by saying, "You can read all you want, free of judgment about your personal character. You are free to purchase and consume whatever you like. You are adults, for God's sake. Look at you paying your taxes and presumably your broadband bill." I've had this discussion, and in most cases, heated argument, with many a fantasy fan, and we all come across the same problem. How to define a fantasy novel? Is that really the problem that you guys come across? And I grant you, it's one heck of a task. It's really not. It is heroic fantasy, epic fantasy, high fantasy, dark fantasy, gluten-free fantasy. That's not a matter of defining fantasy as a whole. Those are just subgenres of fantasy. Anyway, I've only got the space of this article, so let me be insufficiently blunt in coining the overall classification. Elfy, wizardy stuff. Well, what is so wrong with wizardy, elfy stuff, or whatever you've reduced it to? I hear you ask. Well, nothing if we had infinity to read all the books. But alas, I believe we must all choose a little more wisely. So I like how when they're supposed to be this other person that is questioning them and opposing them, it says, "What's wrong with wizardy elfy stuff?" or whatever you've reduced it to. I don't think wizardy elfy stuff is so complicated of a description that we'd be like, or, whatever you said. I don't know, whatever it was. I'm pretty sure the word wizard and elf with Y's at the end of them, easy enough for us to remember. They continue on with, "The amount of time we have between now and death is finite and ever receding." Shh, physicists, not now. So you're saying we're gonna die eventually. I don't think any physicists are like, wait a second. Continuing. "And we must choose wisely how we spend it. And to do so, we all make value judgments. For my money, with the little time left, I've decided not to bother with fantasy novels, and here is why." Their first reason is the mother effers are too long. The fantastic Megan Lay wrote a wonderful piece about fantasy and sci-fi worlds where she mentions a fantasy novel, The Way of Kings, which weighs in at a mammoth 1,105 pages. That's not a weight, that's a page count. That's okay. Something I've noticed about the peddlers of elfy wizardy stuff is they seem to adopt the attitude of, why use one word when several pages of bulky exposition will do? Why let your reader be part of the world-building experiencing? Take every slither of subtext away from them, choke them with a thick fog of detail, lest they deviate from your version of what your world should look like. I'm sure there is a whole canon of writers that contributed to this, but I'm going to put the blame squarely on Tolkien. So, pausing for a second, there's nothing wrong with somebody not liking fantasy. There's nothing wrong with somebody not really wanting to read fantasy. But maybe if your point is that fantasy books are too long, don't pick the series that is known for having some of the longest books. There are plenty that are long, yes, but then there are also plenty that are in the 300s. Getting on to their second point. They are, from what I can see, stylistically similar/identical. There is a hero or heroes, which, unless you're not familiar with the world of favorable protagonists, is you. You are the protagonist, you heroic son of a female dog, you. Your role as a commander of the light is to rage against the dichotomous darkness, led by some dude, almost always a dude, who is really bent on ruling all of insert world here because He's evil, of course. So this article was written in 2013, and they mention Game of Thrones, which is a story that I feel like, regardless of whether you like it, is kind of one of the things that epitomizes, hey, all our good guys aren't necessarily good, and a lot of our bad guys, they're not bad just to be bad. There's a range. They eventually go on to say, don't get me wrong. History is littered with despotic, malevolent rulers, and we all wish we could dispose them in a fiery blaze of epic glory. But how many times do you want to reread that fantasy in cosmetically different combinations? Twice, tops. Well, take the 4 or 5 steps to your left/right to the long-suffering sibling of the fantasy novel, the science fiction section, where writers consistently find ingenious ways of imagining the future that have fed discussions, influenced our lives, and plague our thoughts. And then they go on to list some science fiction books, which I don't understand how somebody who can basically just take a giant number 2 on fantasy can have the audacity to say, like, at least science fiction makes us think. Their third point, they say that fantasy books don't really say anything. And then they have a lot of jibber jabber after that, but that's the summary of what their third point is. Anyway, they go on to finally kind of summarize all their points. And they say, now the thing about the points made above is that they are pretty much true for a lot of genres, in as much as large-scale publishing houses create lists based on an almost algorithmic pattern based on consumption habits and selling patterns. Nobody seems to want to break the mold for the most part, neither publisher nor bookseller nor reader alike. So, I'm sorry, I'm confused. What are booksellers gonna sell if not the books that publishing houses have to get? Like, what are booksellers gonna be like, you know what, I'm not gonna sell any of the products that my entire store is based in? I'm just imagining all these independent bookstores that are like, excuse me, I don't want to sell all of these stereotypical fantasy stories. They just don't break the mold. And also, it's not like booksellers read every single book that's in their bookstores. Continuing on. So, if I can't convince you not to read these things, sorry. Okay, back to it. I'd like those elfy, wizardy purveyors among you to chuck in a curveball every once in a while. Read something in a section you usually avoid, like the translated fiction table or even the poetry corner. It's like, why did they put a question mark? Like, maybe that stuff? I don't know, just something. Also, does this person know that fantasy books can be translated from other languages? They give more things. They have more things to say. How about the army of self-published authors that would not be picked up so easily by publisher or lit agent? See, that sentence could have a question mark. It doesn't have one. It should, because it starts with a how. But also, self-published books can be fantasy. There are a great many people doing a great many things, and none of us should be stymied in 1,105 pages of poorly written tomes that turn out to be good yarns. I love it when people say things are poorly written. It's my favorite. It's one of my favorite things when people say that something is poorly written and they have tons of errors in their articles. They summarize it all for us by saying, so that descended into a didactic rant a little more quickly than I might have hoped. My stupid veil is always slipping. But in conclusion, life is far, far too short for fantasy novels. I feel like, I don't know, if life is too short to read fantasy novels, it's also too short to write really poorly researched, judgy opinion pieces. Full confession time though, I definitely feel moved after reading that. I do plan to sell all of my fantasy books, well, except for Witcher, because those ones are translated. But I think I'm gonna get rid of all of them, and then I'm going to only get science fiction. I've been convinced. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. If there are any other articles that are like this one that you stumble upon and you feel like sharing them with me, feel free to send me a link, because this kind of stuff is super funny to me. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys later. Bye.